In this presentation, you will learn about structural functionalism. Structural functionalism was a theoretical school in Great Britain, originally formulated to move away from evolutionism and diffusion. As a new paradigm, functionalism was presented as a reaction against what was believed to be outdated ideologies. It was an attempt to move away from the evolutionism and diffusionism that dominated American and British anthropology at the turn of the century. There was a shift in focus from the speculatively historical or diachronic study of customs and culture traits as survivals to the ahistorical synchronic study of social institutions within bounded functioning societies. Structural functionalism's core concepts are in harness, structure, and system. Structural functionalism emphasizes the formal ordering of parts and their functional interrelations as contributing to maintenance needs of a structured social system. The function of any institution or recurrent social activity was the part it played in the maintenance of the larger structural whole. This assumption attributed to social systems an internal integration of parts similar to that found in organisms. Modern sociological and anthropological theory has been profoundly influenced by functional analysis. Its history can be traced to Comte's consensus universals, Spencer's organic analogy, Pareto's conception of society as a system of equilibrium, and Durkheim's causal functional analysis. Functionalism was a reaction to the perceived excesses and deficiencies of the evolutionary and diffusionist theories of the 19th century and the historicism of the early 20th. Functionalists seek to describe the different parts of a society and their relationship by means of an organic analogy. The organic analogy compares the different parts of a society to the organs of a living organism. The organism is able to live, reproduce, and function through the organized system of its several parts and organs. Like a biological organism, a society is able to maintain its essential processes through the way that the different parts interact. Institutions such as religion, kinship, and the economy were the organs, and individuals were the cells in this social organism. Functionalist analysis examined the social significance of phenomena, that is, the function they serve a particular society in maintaining the whole. The term functionalism cannot be explained easily for the simple reason that the term function and functional have been used to mean different things by different thinkers. The functional approach is much older in biology, psychology, and cultural anthropology than sociology. Earlier, the term function was commonly used in a positive sense of contribution made by a part for the whole. Today, it is used to mean consequences which may or may not to be intended or recognized. Functionalism as a school of thought in anthropology emerged in the early 20th century. Functionalism in anthropology is generally divided into two schools of thought, each associated with a key personality. Bronislaw Malinowski and A.R. Radcliffe Brown had the greatest influence on the development of functionalism from their posts in Great Britain and elsewhere. Two versions of functionalism developed between 1910 and 1930. Malinowski's biocultural or psychological functionalism and structural functionalism, the approach advanced by Radcliffe Brown. Psychological functionalism is linked to Bronislaw Malinowski. Malinowski's method was based on extensive in-depth fieldwork during which he gathered evidence to support his theoretical position. The second school, structural functionalism, is associated with A.R. Radcliffe Brown. He sought to understand how cultural institutions maintain the equilibrium and cohesion of a society. Malinowski is considered as one of the founding fathers of British social anthropology. He was trained in physical sciences and received a PhD in physics and mathematics in 1908. He was influenced by Durkheim and William Wundt at Leipzig. In 1910, he studied anthropology at London School of Economics. Later, he trained many of the finest English anthropologists, including E. Evans Pritchard, Isaac Scafera, Raymond Firth, Fortes and Nadell, etc. He built the anthropological program at the London School of Economics and Cambridge. Malinowski was interested in religion and folklore. He breached the boundary between fieldwork and theory through his fieldwork revolution. His famous books are Argonauts of the Western Pacific, Sex and Repression in Savage Society. Malinowski's concept of culture was a most stimulating contribution to the anthropological thought of his day, but his contribution has been undervalued. His ethnographic concerns were with how culture met the needs of the individual. It contradicted with the views of A.R. Radcliffe Brown, who emphasized how culture met the needs of society. In order to understand this difference and to evaluate Malinowski's contribution, one must begin with his theory of needs. The theory of needs. Malinowski's theory of need is central to his functional approach to culture. Through his theory, he tried to link the individual and society. According to him, culture exists to meet the basic biological, psychological, and social needs of the individual. Malinowski viewed function in physiological sense. He defined function as the satisfaction of an organic impulse by the appropriate act. He developed his physiology analogy further. For example, he argued that if we have to describe how normal lung operates, we would be describing the form of the process. But if we attempt to explain why the lung is operating in a manner, then we are concerned with its function. Malinowski wrote that cultural institutions are integrated responses to a variety of needs, and to outline those needs, he used a variant of his synoptic chart. Basic need, metabolism, the cultural response, commensural. Basic need, reproduction, the cultural response, kinship. Basic need, bodily comfort, the cultural response, shelter. In the same way, safety, protection, movement activities, growth training, health and hygiene. Malinowski described each of these needs, our cultural responses in detail with a few examples. The first human need, metabolism, refers to the process of food intake, digestion, the collateral secretions, the absorption of nutritive substances and the rejection of waste matter. The cultural response or commensal, military unit that supplies food to an army include how the food was grown, prepared and consumed, where food was consumed and in what social unit, economic and social organization of distributing food, legal and customary rule for food distribution, authority that enforces those rules. The basic need, safety, simply refers to the prevention of bodily injuries by mechanical accident, attack from animals or other human beings. But the cultural response, protection, may include different behavior as placing houses on piling away from potential tidal waves, organization of armed responses to aggression, or the magical recruitment of supernatural forces. Growth, which in human is structured by long dependency of the infants, leads to the cultural response of training by which humans are taught language, other symbols, and appropriate behaviors for different stages unless they are socially and psychophysiologically in nature. Malinowski summarized his theory of need with two axioms. Every culture must satisfy the biological system of needs. Every cultural achievement that implies use of artifacts and symbols enhance human anatomy and thus directly satisfies bodily needs. In short, culture is utilitarian, adaptive and functionally integrated, and explanation of culture involves the delineation of function. A classic example is Malinowski's approach to magic. The function of magic. Magic was an integral element to Malinowski's theory because magic was central to theobrand life. Magic was used to kill enemies and prevent one being killed, to ease childbirth, to enhance beauty of a dancer. Magic always appeared in those phases of human action where knowledge fails man. Malinowski argued that magic has a profound function in exerting human control over those dimensions that are otherwise outside of our control. Primitive man cannot manipulate the weather. Experience teaches him that rain and sunshine, wind, heat and cold cannot be produced by his own hands, however much he might think about or observe such phenomena. He therefore deals with magic. He hypothesized that limited scientific knowledge of illness and disease led primitive man to conclude that illness are caused by sorcery and countered by magic. Magic is organized in fishing too. No magic is practiced when it is possible to make a catch in weather and under condition in which no other kind of fishing is practiced. In contrast, magic is associated with ocean fishing, sailing and canoes is complex and pervasive because the danger and risks are greater. Similarly, magic surrounding gardening is extensive and is considered an indispensable part of cultivation. Garden magic is public, direct and extensive. The village garden magician is either the headman, his heir, or closest male relative, and therefore he is either the most important or most person in a community. Magic is an indispensable to the success of garden as competent and effective husbandry. It is essential to the fertility of the soil. The garden magic utters magic by mouth. The magical virtues enters the soil. Magic is to them an utmost natural element in the growth of gardens. Malinowski believed that the essential function of religion is an attempt to extend control over the uncontrollable elements of nature. In this sense, his analysis of magic reflects his functional approach to culture. Psychological functionalism. Malinowski's psychological functionalism is represented by the essentials of the Kula in chapter 3 of his ethnography, Argonauts of the Western Pacific. In this, Malinowski offers a description of trade in Kula. The chapter showcases Malinowski's skill as an ethnographer and also illustrates many of his fundamental ideas. For example, the Kula Exchange of Trobriand Islanders. Malinowski's classic case of the Kula relates to an exchange of ceremonial goods among a series of ethnically different communities at east end of New Guinea and on adjacent island groups. These form geographically a rough ring. On every island and in every village, a more or less limited number of men take part in Kula, that is to say, receive the goods, hold them for a short time and then pass them on. Therefore, every man who is in Kula, periodically though not regularly, receives one of several arm shells or a sulava, necklace of red shell discs. He then had to hand it on to one of his partners, from whom he receives the opposite commodity in exchange. Thus, no man ever keeps any of the articles for any length of time in his possession. The partnership between two men is a permanent and lifelong affair, and any given Nwali or Sulave are always found traveling and changing hands, and there is no question of its ever setting down. Thus, the principle once in a Kula, always in a Kula applies also to valuables themselves. Kula Exchange in Southeast New Guinea. Objects ceremonially exchanged are armlets made of spiral troncus shell and necklaces primarily of pink spondylus shell discs. Malinowski, surrounded by elaborate social and magical activities of traditional character, transactions were called Kula. The ceremonial exchange of articles like arm shells and necklaces is the fundamental aspect of Kula, but side by side the natives carry on ordinary trade, bartering from one island to another. Thus, Kula ring ties all these people by way of such ceremonial gifts between neighbors into a system of mutual interrelationships. Kula activities tend to penetrate all aspects of their life. visiting, feasts, ceremonies, art display, religious activities, the status of kin groups and individuals, opportunities for trade. An inquiry, therefore, into the function of the kula, that is, what it does, calls for an examination of its total meaning and content with regards each of the culture concerned and also the intellectual relations involved. Criticism. Malinowski's work has been criticized on numerous grounds. His theory is considered as a rude theory in which all sorts of behavior are reduced to simplistic notion of utility. Yet Malinowski has been very influential as he emphasized the adaptive significance of culture. Malinowski's most enduring contribution was his effort to understand the subjective experience of another culture through the immersive strategy of ethnographic research. A.R. Radcliffe Brown. Radcliffe Brown was a British social anthropologist. He studied anthropology at Cambridge under Haddon and Rivers. He was greatly influenced by the work of Durkheim. Although he did his field work in the Andaman Islands and Australia, he was more interested in comparative study of different cultures than in field work in one culture. By deriving his concept from Durkheim, he tried to show how cultural systems function to maintain a society's equilibrium. His book, The Andaman Islanders, became the vehicle through which French comparative sociology shaped the course of British anthropology. Brown occupied a number of academic positions and frequently established new anthropology departments in University of Cape Town, Sydney, Chicago, Oxford, Cairo, and South Africa. Structure and function. Brown used the concept of social structure as early as 1914. The notion of structure made his comparative approach possible. This was his unit of comparison. According to him, structures are the relations of association between individuals, and they exist independently of individual members who might occupy different positions, much in the way that hero, heroine, and villain define a set of relationships in a melodrama, regardless of the actors who play the roles. Although he used the term culture in his early work, he rejected the concept later in his career. He believed that culture was an abstract concept. As the values and norms of a society couldn't be observed, a science of culture was impossible. He preferred to study social structures and principles that organize person in a society and the roles and relationships that can be observed firsthand. Social structure includes all interpersonal relations. Radcliffe Brown considered social structure to be empirically knowable and concrete. He used the term social structure in a different way to make discussion difficult. For many, social structure has nothing to do with reality, but he regarded social structure as reality. For example, he picked up a particular seashell on the beach to recognize a particular structure. He may find other shells of the same species which have similar structure, so that he could say there is a form of structure characterized of the species. Thus, we can identify certain social structures, exogamous moieties, joking relationships, cross-cousin marrying, and so on, to compare structures of different societies to understand principles of these social structures. Organic analogy and functionalism. Inevitably, Brown's explanation of social structure leads to consideration of function. He believed the function of culture to be maintenance of society, rather satisfaction to individual needs, as Malinowski argued. His theory was based on organic analogy, referring to activities meeting the needs of structure, and the continuity of structure is based on the process of social life. The social life of the community is defined as the functioning of the social structure. The function of a crime or a funeral ceremony is the part it plays in the social life as a whole, and therefore the contribution it makes to the maintenance of structural continuity. This view implies that social system has a kind of unity which can be called as functional unity. We may define it as a condition in which all parts of the system wrote together with a sufficient degree of harmony or internal consistency that is, without producing any conflict. Brown illustrated the concept of social structure by citing example from the tribes of Western Australia. He said that tribes are divided into number of territories and men, thus connected with a particular territory, formed a distinct social group. One may speak that this was the unit of fundamental importance in social structure. Among the Australian tribes, class is known as lord. The internal structure of the lord was a division into families, each composed of a man with his wife or wives and their young children. There is a continuous existence of a lord. As the members of the death of the old ones, the newly born members enter the lord. Thus, continuity of the social group is an important factor for the existence of the social structure. And this continuity of the structure is maintained by the process of social life. Joking relationships and functionalism. The goal of Radcliffe Brown was to provide a scientific understanding of joking relationships. Following Durkheim and Spencer, Brown's main concern was to maintain social order. He understood society as made up of institutions which could be understood in terms of its function. Its function was the role it played in maintaining social order. Brown sees a critical contradiction at the core of marriage. A husband does not be a part of the wife's family, but neither is he entirely separated from them. A wife doesn't become a part of her husband's family, and her family of origin continues to have interest in her and her children. This contradiction creates the preconditions for conflict between the two families. For society to function smoothly, there must be an institution to resolve this conflict. What is true within a group is also true between groups. Just as potential conflict between husband and wife's family can be resolved, so too can the conflict between tribes and clans be resolved by avoidance and joking. The social function of this is obvious. The social tradition is handed down from one generation to the next. This results in organizing a definite and stable system of social behavior. Thus, Brown argues that structural relations between people in certain position in kinship system lead to conflict of interest. Such conflict could threaten the stability of society. However, this problem is solved through ritualized joking or avoidance between people in such positions. Thus, when conflict threatens stability, society develops social institutions to mediate oppositions and preserve social solidarity. Exogamous moieties. Exogamous moieties are kin system in which a population is derived into two social divisions and a man of one moiety must marry a woman of another moiety. He began his analysis with Aboriginal groups in New South Wales, where moieties were matrilineal, exogamous, and were named after their respective totems: Eaglehawk, Kilpara, and the crow, Makwara. Radcliffe Brown argued that neither conjectural history nor diffusion provides satisfactory explanation and turned to comparison of structure. He examined cases from Australia and found many cases of exogamous moieties, some patrilineal, others matrilineal, named after birds. Further, other forms of organization are also named after birds. Brown analyzed stories of eaglehawk, crow, and other moiety to gain insight into native thinking. The similarity and differences of animal species are translated into terms of friendship and conflict, solidarity and opposition. In other words, the world of animal life is represented in terms of social relations similar to human society. Eaglehawk and crow steals. Other examples of oppositions are black cockatoo versus white cockatoo, coyote versus wildcat, upstream versus downstream, and so on. They are all associated with exogamous moieties. Thus, Brown concluded that whatever in Australia, Melanesia, or America, there exists a social structure of exogamous moieties who can be in opposition. Andaman Islanders ritual. Brown contrasted between totemism and ancestor worship. He defined ancestor worship as the worship of a deceased ancestor or ancestors or clan. Offerings of food and drink are made to ancestors, which are usually conceived of as sharing a meal with an ancestor. The rite of ancestor worship also reflects a sense of dependency between the worshipper and the ancestor who will give him children and well-being, provide blessings and illness. For the individual, his primary duties are those of lineage. These include duties to the members now living, but also to those who have died and who are not yet born. In carrying out these duties, he is controlled and inspired by the complex system of lineage itself, past, present, and future. The social function of rites is obvious by solemn and collective expression. Rites reaffirm, renew, and strengthen the sentiments on which social solidarity depends. He also produced a broader theoretical statement about the social function of religions, that is, the contribution they make to the formation and maintenance of a social order. In conclusion, Brown's analysis of social structure and function redirected anthropological inquiry to the institution of human life and to the role such institutions play in the maintenance and reproduction of society. Comparison between Malinowski and Brown. While Malinowski emphasized on individual need, Brown explained phenomena in terms of social structure, especially its need for solidarity and integration. For Malinowski, culture was the instrument by which human needs were met. Brown emphasized more on social function rather than individual function. Malinowski's method was based on extensive fieldwork. Brown believed in comparative study of various cultures and societies. Both Malinowski and Brown had much in common in their early writing, as they were both influenced by Durkheim. But later, Malinowski fell out of Durkheim influence, whereas Brown remained loyal to Durkheimian tradition. Let's summarize. Functionalism. In Europe, the reaction against evolution was not as dramatic as in the United States, but a clear division between the diffusionists and those who came to be known as functionalists emerged by the 1930s. Functionalism in social science looks for the part that some aspect of culture or social life plays in maintaining a cultural system. Two quite different schools of functionalism arose in conjunction with two British anthropologists, Malinowski and Brown. Malinowski's version of functionalism assumes that all cultural traits serve the needs of individuals in a society. They satisfy some basic or derived need of the members of the group. Basic needs include nutrition, reproduction, bodily comfort, safety, relaxation, movement, and growth. Some aspects of the culture satisfy these basic needs and give rise to derived needs that must also be satisfied. For example, culture traits that satisfy the basic need for food give rise to the secondary or derived need for cooperation in food collection or production. Societies will in turn develop forms of political organization and social control that guarantee the required cooperation. How did Malinowski explain such things as religion and magic? He suggested that because humans always live with a certain amount of uncertainty and anxiety, they need stability and continuity. Religion and magic are functional in that they serve both those needs. Unlike Malinowski, Brown felt that the various aspects of social behavior maintain a society's social structure rather than satisfying individual needs. By social structure, he meant the total network of existing social relationships in a society. The phrase structural functionalism is often used to describe Brown's approach. To explain how different societies deal with the tensions that are likely to develop among people related through marriage, Brown suggested that societies do one of two things. They develop strict rules forbidding the people involved ever to interact face to face. They must also allow mutual disrespect and teasing between mother-in-laws. Radcliffe Brown suggested that avoidance is likely to occur between in-laws of different generations, whereas disrespectful teasing is likely between in-laws of the same generation. Both avoidance and teasing, he suggested, are ways to avoid real conflict and help maintain social structure. The major objection to Malinowski's functionalism is that it cannot readily account for cultural variation. Most of the needs he identified, such as the need for food, are universal. All societies must deal with them if they are to survive. Thus, although the functionalist approach may tell us why all societies engage in food getting, It cannot tell why different societies have different food-getting practices. Functionalism does not explain why certain specific cultural patterns arise to fulfill a need that might be fulfilled just as easily by any of a number of alternative possibilities. Critical evaluation. A major problem of the structural functionalist approach is that it is difficult to determine whether a particular custom is in fact functional in the sense of contributing to the maintenance of the social system. In biology, the contribution an organ makes to the health or life of an animal can be assessed by removing it. But we cannot subtract a cultural trait from a society to see if the trait really does contribute to the maintenance of that group. It is conceivable that certain customs within a society may be neutral or even detrimental to its maintenance. Moreover, we cannot assume that all of a society's customs are functional merely because the society is functioning at the moment. Even if we are able to assess whether a particular custom is functional, this theoretical orientation fails to deal with the question of why a particular society chooses to meet its structural needs in a particular way. A given problem does not necessarily have only one solution. We must still explain why one of several possible solutions is chosen. Thank you for watching the presentation.